Okay, we have learned three ways to solve quadratic equations. We've done solve by factoring, where you take each factor and set it equal to 0 and solve for each one. We've done solve by square rooting, where you simply solve for x by taking the square root. Usually this only happens when you have an x squared term, but not an x term, so there's just one thing to solve for. And then you have the quadratic formula, negative b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And so there's your third method. So we've done these three methods here. Now, what we're going to do this week is you just have to solve quadratic equations by whatever method you think is most appropriate. So some tips for solving quadratics. Please remember, if you're factoring or taking the quadratic formula, you need to have your equation in standard form. Square rooting, it does help unless there's a different example, a different type of equation, like we'll see in example A here. Make sure you try factoring first. If you can factor the equation easily, that's usually a faster method. You will get two solutions. Make sure your quadratic equation has two solutions. And the quadratic formula always works if nothing else does. So if you're trying to factor, if you're trying to do the square root, you're not getting the answers, the quadratic formula always works. So you could even just always do that if you want to, unless you're instructed otherwise. But sometimes it's faster to factor or square root or whatever. So we're going to look at three examples here, and then you will have the rest to do on your own. For example A, so we have x minus 3 all squared equals 4. Now for this one, I think it's better if we just do the square root, because we have a perfect square here. We know 4 is a perfect square, and then we know this is a perfect square because it says x minus 3 squared. So if we decided to go ahead and multiply that out and then do standard form, we could probably use a quadratic formula, or we could probably factor, but let's just take the square root. So we get x minus 3 equals, and this is positive and negative 2. Right? Don't forget, when you take the square root of a number, you get a positive answer and a negative answer. And so we're going to add 3 now to solve for x. So don't forget, you have to do both, right? Positive 2 plus 3 is 5, and negative 2 plus 3 is 1. And there are our two solutions. So if you think about this, if you plug these numbers in to your original equation, putting 5 in here gives you 5 minus 3 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. That works. And if you try 1, 1 minus 3 is negative 2, but negative 2 squared is also positive 4, so they both work. So that's solved by square rooting. Like I said, it's probably the easiest way, but it's also the least common. All right, now here we have 4 times x plus 2 squared equals 80. So it looks like we could probably solve by square rooting again, but we have to isolate the squared term, right? So we're going to divide by 4 to isolate that. So we get x plus 2 squared equals 20. 80 divided by 4 is 20. Actually, 20 is not a perfect square. So we can't solve by square rooting, because we're going to get some awkward, some awkward answer. So let's go ahead and multiply this out. X squared plus 4x plus 4. And then we'll go ahead and subtract 20 from both sides. So x squared plus 4x minus 16 equals 0. Okay. Now we think, let's try for factoring. Can we factor? Are there two numbers that when you multiply them give you negative 16, and when you add them you get negative or positive 4? I don't think so. 4 times 4 So 4 times negative 4, that'd be 0. 8 times 2, you're not going to get 4 with a negative 2 and a positive 8. And then 16 and 1, no, we're not going to get there. So we need to use the quadratic formula. So remember, A here is 1, B is 4, and C is negative 16. So x equals the opposite of B, that's negative 4, plus and minus the square root of B squared, so 16 minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is negative 16, all over 2A, so 2 times 1, that's 2. Okay, so remember the quadratic formula. If you don't have it memorized, it's okay. You just look it up, use it here. It'll be included in your work, or you can just look it up online. Just make sure you know how to fill it out, A, B, and C. Okay, now let's do some simplifying here. Negative 4 plus and minus the square root of, well, 4 times 16, is 64, right? So we have 16 plus 64 because we got 2 negatives in there. So 16 plus 64 is 80. So negative 4 plus and minus the square root of 80 over 2. Let's simplify the square root of 80. 80 is 4 times 20. Well, we can go one more. How about 16 times 5? 16 is a perfect square. So the square root of 16 is 4, right? So x equals negative 4 plus and minus 4 root 5 over 2. So make sure you understand how we did that. We took the square root of 16, that's 4. That's how we got this 4 right here. And the 5 stays inside the radical. Now we just divide everything by 2. And x equals negative 2 plus and minus negative 2 plus and minus 2 root 5 over 1. So just that right there. We got there. So that's a little bit of a longer one, but you see the process, right? First you think, oh, maybe we can do the square root. Doesn't work out. So let's put it in standard form and quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula always works. So, if you're not sure, you can just use that. Okay, final example here. Let's get it in standard form. So x squared minus 6x minus 2 equals 0. And are there two numbers here that multiply to negative 2 and add to negative 6? I don't think so. So again, we'll be using the quadratic formula. All right, it's okay. So we got A is 1, B is negative 6, and C is negative 2. Okay, so x equals 6 plus and minus the square root of 36 minus 4 times 1 times negative 2 all over 2. 2a is 2. So 6 plus and minus the square root of 36 plus 8, right? 4 times 2 is 8. So 44 over 2. Well, 44 is 4 and 11. And the square root of 4 is 2. So 2 root 11 over 2. And we can divide all those by 2 there. We can simplify that. 3, 1, and 1. So x here equals 3 plus and minus the square root of 11. So there you have it. If you're not sure, if it doesn't work out any other way, use the quadratic formula. Factoring, hopefully at this point you're all familiar with factoring and getting those solutions. So I did want to practice quadratic formula more, but if you're not sure about factoring, look back in your notes from earlier in the semester. But good luck on the rest of these. You've got 9 here to do. And as always, email if you have questions.